Hi, class. I'm Ray Hagerman. I'm your instructor for ECO 655, which is cost benefit analysis. Uh, this is a great time to be doing this in this time of the year in spring. But I'd like to introduce myself first, and then we will go over a few things that are important to the class and some things that maybe I expect and things that I think will make you successful, and then we will do a quick PowerPoint. And I say quick, it shouldn't last longer than an hour. And the only reason that it will last an hour is because I believe in giving good, solid summary information, and giving you readings and assignments to be done within the time frame that we've assigned. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to share my screen, and let's go through what we are doing together, and we'll go from there. So one thing, little housekeeping on the front end of this. The syllabus that I prepared for you is generally, when I say generally, I mean mostly appropriate. There are a few things that have changed. One thing I would ask that you focus on is all of it is important information. The one thing that is going to change to some degree is there's a sheet in there. It's probably about 3 or 4 sheets down in it that I mention all of the readings and several YouTubes that can be helpful, and other videos that you can get off of the internet in order to maybe understand the concepts just a little bit better. So that will change. What you do need to pay attention to is, number one, all of the readings and any of the assignments that are given are going to be in the module. Anything that you will need will be in the learning materials in the module. So in terms of what the readings are, what textbook, which there are two textbooks. There's the Danny Myers textbook, and then there's the Schaefer um, and Marculier and Decker. Let's see, Schaefer, Deller, and Marculier tech. Those are the only textbooks that you'll actually need. The rest of it are going to be things like articles that are appropriate to cost benefit analysis. And it's going to be important that you look at those things. I have made sure that any YouTubes that you might look at where they explain things really well, probably even better than I could recreate these. And I want you to read through or listen to those. There's almost none of them that the sum total of the YouTubes last more than like 30, 40 minutes. So between the readings and the YouTubes, you'll have the background information that you'll need to do this with. I will tell you on the front end, I am an economic development practitioner. This course is geared toward the master's program in economic development. And the course is therefore tailored to those people that are in the industry. So whereas a lot of courses that you go through are going to be very heavy on the theory and background and underlying um, understanding of the concepts involved, yes, we will do that. But at the same point in time, I think it's incredibly important that what you take away from this course is being able to use cost benefit analysis for your job, your career, in whatever it is that you do, but especially if you are an economic developer. So let me advance this. All right, just a little bit about me. This is my very first time to be teaching this course, and my very first time to be teaching specifically at Murray State University. So I'm not going to ask you to cut me slack, but I am going to ask you to understand that sometimes this is kind of a work in progress as we work through the modules. But bear in mind that if you do follow the instructions in the module, watch the videos in the module, focus on the YouTubes and the readings and so forth in the module, you will do just fine. Anyway, back to me. real quickly. Been in economic development for about 25 years. Before that, I was a banker for 16 years. I was specifically a lender in real estate as it relates to acquisition and development and industrial buildings and commercial buildings and so on and so forth, and even subdivision development. That's one of the reasons why choosing the Danny Myers text makes sense. This course is not specifically about construction economics, but several pieces of that book, several chapters in that book do relate to the things that we need to know in order to be successful in this course. So it's as good as any from that particular standpoint. I am a certified economic developer, which means that I have the certification issued by the International Economic Development Council. This is something that I have to re-up every 2 years based on staying current with knowledge and staying current with connectedness to new people in the industry. I typically grade papers as people take the exam in order to get it. What I look at the Certified Economic Developer designation as is if you were an accountant, you would be taking the CPA exam, and it means something. In the economic development world, being a certified economic developer means something. So be that as it may. I do have a master's in economic development, which I got right here at Murray State. I'm very big. I'm a very big supporter of this program. I think it is necessary, certainly throughout the country, but it's definitely necessary in the region, and we need more baseline education, like courses and cost benefit analysis, certainly in Kentucky. I've worked in the economic development field in 4 different states and 3 parts of the country. I've been in Tennessee and Kentucky. I was in Ohio for 12 years doing this work, and in the northwest corner, what we call the Four Corners of New Mexico, where New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah come together. And that was a different world for economic development, but it was nonetheless necessary. And I enjoyed it immensely and got a lot of experience there. Um, but I do now have been in Kentucky for nearly 10 years. But I live and I work in Western Kentucky, and I believe strongly in regional cooperation. So let me back up one. So the course overview, and this is something that will be in the syllabus, but I want to tell you openly, here's what we're going to do and here's how you're going to be judged. All right. This is a 7-week course, so we're going to cram things into 7 weeks, but it's not so much information that you can't do it and do it successfully. Once again, the focus is going to be on how to do things, even more so sometimes than the underlying knowledge of things, although you need that too. This will be done in 6 modules along with a group project that will be due in the 7th week. I will make sure that about 10 days from now, certainly no more than 2 weeks, I will put a module in module 7 with some instructions on how to do the group project and what I'm expecting in the group project. And I would encourage you before the midpoint of the course that you actually do get together with your teammates and come up with a game plan and start working on your project and make sure that it gets done and submitted before the May 4th deadline. Now, what we're going to do on that group project is I believe we have 11, maybe 12 people that have signed up for this course in CBA. And what we will do is I'm going to divide people up into groups of 4, with one group having a group of 3. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have, 25% more work, although that's quite possible. And if I deem it appropriate to add a little extra credit to that group for doing a good job with 3 versus 4, then I will do so. So don't feel slighted if you're the group of 3 rather than the group of 4. That those group formations may change a little bit because, believe it or not, people do drop courses. And if they do, then we may have to reconsolidate some of those teams. But I would encourage you since this is a required uh, course in the economic development masters, that you stick with it. It's not, I promise you this, I will help you every step of the way with this. The concepts are not that super difficult, but if you stay current and you stay up, I think you will do just fine in this course. As I said, it's going to be oriented to economic developers, which means I'm going to focus less on knowing all the equations, being able to regurgitate a graph, an economic graph, and so on and so forth, and more focused on how do you actually use a CBA model to generate information so you can analyze it. Basically, what this course is going to teach you is it's going to give you the background information and some of the economic theory baseline that make the CBA make sense to you. And then the second piece of this is going to be how you can know how to put the model together, input all the information where it needs to be in the model, which I will give to you. And then lastly, being able to interpret those results the way that they should be interpreted, and also enable you to look at other people that do CBAs, whether it's in economic development or it's in other fields such as transportation, recreation, community development, and those sorts of things. So you'll be able to read one of those and make sense of it and understand what the information is telling you. So at the end of the day, you learn how to use the model, you learn how to put the correct information in the model, and it will spit out, if you will, a net present value that shows you that this result is a good one and it's something we should do. The group project has to do with an actual economic development project whereby a particular company is going to be coming to a community. And when they come to that community, the community wants to offer them an incentive package. And based on that incentive package, you're going to do a cost benefit analysis to see if it's a good decision or not. Is the community going to benefit in the long run by offering this particular incentive package? So there's a practical notion of how this is constructed. The other thing that's going to be important that you need to know is I will give you all of the information. In fact, it's already in the module, all of the information that you need in order to understand where to get some information and financial statements of the particular community that is going to be in question. You're going to be able to look at those reports that I've given you PDFs for and determine, okay, this is what they're looking for. This is where I find the information. This is the piece of information that I plug into the model. So from that perspective, I will guide you all the way through it. There will be some times where we need to know specific um, uh, attributes of a particular industry and how those create outputs. But quite frankly, in the past, this course at Murray State has used EMSI as the software used for analysis. But EMSI got bought out about 2 years ago by somebody else, and that software doesn't even look the same. So I'm working on the possibility of getting, if everyone doesn't have a free subscription to MPlan through your other courses at Murray State, if you don't have that and I can't get it available for you, I will literally give you the output data so that you can put it into your into your model. So never fear, we're going to be able to work our way through this together. So again, focusing on CBA as a tool, not just as theoretics, and 30% of your grade is actually you're going to be watching the videos, you're going to be doing the readings, and there are 4 discussions, module 1, module 2, module 3, and module 5, that you're going to be responsible as an assignment to do discussions. You've all done these before. I know that you have, where there's a question asked, or 1 or 2 or 3 questions that you can pick one and respond to it, give references, make sure that you're telling me that you're not just regurgitating what I ask, but you're actually telling me and giving me references in the readings and so forth, that you understand what is being asked and why you believe the way that you do about this. It'll require about a half page to a page that I want you to answer that question. And then once you answer that question, which I would hope that you would do on Wednesday or Thursday of a given week, and then make sure that you respond to 2 of your classmates with maybe a paragraph that shows that you understand what they were trying to say, and give an intelligent response as a result. And there's a rubric, it's in every one of those, that shows you how I'm going to be scoring those. Those will be due by the end of Sunday of a given week. So by midnight on Sunday, you will need to make sure that you get those discussions both submitted, the answer to the question, and responding to 2 of your classmates. There are 2 homework exams, and basically they both have to do with how to input a model, how to interpret I will give you the model, or you'll be asked to provide a simple spreadsheet where you analyze data that's been given and come up with your write-up as to what you believe is going on here, and how to interpret those results. Once again, I'll guide you through that. There's 2 of those homework problems, each one that's on module 4, and it's also on module 6. Each one of those count 5% of your grade, so a total of 10%. And then, so that's 40% of your grade. 30 more percent of your grade is literally an open book exam. It happens in module 4. And so you'll be responsible for doing this open book, which is multiple choice and true false answers to questions that involve module 1, module 2, module 3, and module 4. And at that point in time, you'll be able to use anything in the course, or even outside information, as long as it's not you don't just Google an answer. What I want you to do is stick to what I have given you in terms of how to answer the questions. So once again, it is 50 questions of 2 points each. So it equals 100, but whatever you score on that exam is going to be 30% of your grade. Again, it's open book, and I'm literally giving you 6 hours to take the exam. But what you need to do is make sure that you understand that, let's just say hypothetically, I open it up at 8 a.m. on that Friday morning, and it's due at the end of the day on Sunday. If you start taking the exam on Friday at 8 o'clock in the morning, you've got 6 hours from that start for you to answer or for you to complete the exam. So in other words, by 2 p.m. that day, you're going to have this done. You can't start and stop. So 6 hours should give you plenty of time to research anything you need to do. And some of those questions are going to be almost common sense to you. And furthermore, I'm not going to have anything on the exam that I haven't at least referenced in the readings or the YouTubes, or I've literally had it on the PowerPoints. The group project will count, in total, it will count 30% to round out to 100% for the course. But the group project itself, among say the 4 people, that group project that you did together is going to be worth 20% of each one of your grades. And then I'm going to ask you to keep people from free riding, which is a term that we're going to be discussing. To keep you from free riding, your peers are going to evaluate the quality of your contribution. So everybody has to contribute something, and your peers are going to help determine that last 10%. So belabored that a little bit, but I want you to understand exactly what's being asked of you and how you're going to be graded. Now, what I would encourage you to do in order to be successful here is to focus on the weekly video and the slides that I'll have. And here's my theory on slides and presentations. If I can't get my points across to you in 20 slides or less, then I really haven't done a good job of communicating the information. So once again, I'll expect you to do the readings. I'll expect you to watch the outside YouTubes. But as it relates to the information that I'm giving you, I'm going to give you the important points, the summary points. And so be prepared that a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about in the videos are probably going to be on the test. Do the readings. Again, there's textbooks, there's articles, there's presentations by others, and samples even of CBA or economic impact analysis. A cost benefit analysis can take several forms, and we're going to talk about that. But the bottom line is you're going to be looking at economic impact analysis, you're going to be looking at fiscal analysis, and being able to combine the two for a CBA. So I've given you examples of some of those things so that you'll be able to understand how to incorporate that into your work. Do the homework. It's, it's what it is. I encourage you to do it and make sure that you don't wait till the last minute to do it. And lastly, in terms of the group project, just be a good teammate. And please, 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 you know how to contact me via the syllabus. Look at how to do it. I've got an email. I've got a Racer email. There's a way to communicate within Canvas. And if all else fails and you need to ask questions, i.e. like office hours, once again, I explained to you, I do have a full-time job, but, and I've also given you in here when the appropriate times might be if you need to call me. Call me on my cell phone. I actually gave you the number there. And just let me know that you have a question. And a lot of times we don't even need to, have a group session in terms of a Zoom or a Teams conversation in order to go over all this stuff. Sometimes it's just a simple question you have, and I can answer it in 5 minutes. So don't be afraid to reach out, and don't wait until you just cannot understand something before you ask. We're all in this together, and we're here to help one another learn, because I want you to leave this course knowing what CBA is and knowing how to use it, because it's a valuable tool. Okay. I've kind of gone over a lot of this stuff. We're going to talk about all of the things in the group project. I'll give you instructions sometime in the March 22nd time frame, and you'll have your assignments. You'll know exactly what you're supposed to do. So I'm just reiterating a lot of what I've talked about already in this particular slide. So without further ado, let's jump in and look at Module 1 in terms of the information. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the summary really about the Module 1, the readings and the YouTubes and so forth, has to do with about 5 different areas that have to do with economic models, theory, and the systems that underlie them. One of the things that's going to be important, and I'll just go ahead and tell you, there's going to be at least a question or two on the test regarding circular flow model. If I didn't put the graph up here, but look in your Myers text. And again, the Myers text The fifth edition, I believe, is the only one available from the bookstore, either online or hard copy. But if you happen to have an earlier edition, it's virtually the same. The page numbers may not be exactly right, but it's going to be the same information. It's early in the chapters. It's like in the first chapter. I want to say it's not even more than 10 or 12 pages in, and they show you a diagram of the circular flow model. All the circular flow model does is it's a simplified model of understanding how local economies work. So in the circular flow model, we're basically saying that the only relationships that exist are between households and businesses. And depending on the flow, those businesses create product using factors of production like the employment of households in order to create products and services. And then those same households or different households actually buy those services or goods, at which time the business then reinvests that money into making more products and selling them to more households. So you can see how there's a circular flow there, hence the name. Money flows to and from each way. Okay. Um, However, there are things that, it's a very simple model. And so, all other things being equal, it's always going to be just perfect. But that's not the case. There is no such perfect world there in a circular flow model. It's a way of explaining things, but it's not perfect. But what we find is that there can be leakages that come out of that flow model. The three most important ones, and these will be in your book, are that taxes are leakages out of the model, imports, in other words, people are buying products that aren't from the businesses in the model. So they're importing those from outside the model, and that affects, and then their savings. So, in other words, the people that are earning the wages to help create the products by the firms, the businesses, aren't spending all of their money. They're saving some of it. Well, guess what? That's a leakage. Those three things are leakages that come out of the circular flow model. By the same token, again, nothing is perfect. In order to facilitate things in that circular flow, sometimes there are other things that could be considered injections, where the leakages are money coming out of the model. Injections is money that is actually going into the model. Those injections can come from exports. Those injections can come from investments into the system, which will enhance the business's ability to create goods and services, or such things as government spending. And government spending can happen both to benefit the households or to help incent or deter behavior in the households. It can also result in an injection of funds that will help the businesses too. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in this session, but those are the three things that you may need to be responsible for this information, that the leakages, what they are, and then the injections can be what they are, just like we're showing here on the slide. Now, how do resources actually get allocated and what happens in the marketplace? If you are an economics major, or you've had a lot of economics in your time, or you've been a business major in the past, maybe that's what your undergrad is in or whatever, a lot of this stuff is just going to be old for you. So you ought to really breeze through this. But what I'm going to do is give some basic things so that those who have not had that kind of background will at least understand where we're coming from as we're determining what actually goes into our CBA over time. So, markets. There's typically two opposite extremes. One will be a central planned economy, and then the other one will be a free market model. Okay, so a centrally planned model, example might be North Korea. We're not going to spend any time at all on this, but basically the government owns the resources and they decide how they're allocated. Now, the problem with that is, among other things, is the coordination among sectors is really, really difficult, and inefficiency is rampant. Why? Because there's no real mechanism to make sure that things hit an equilibrium between what's actually paid for and what's actually produced. So, again, we won't spend any time at all on that. The free market model, however, is going to be very important to us. But if we say that centrally planned is one extreme and free market is the other, I will tell you that as a practical matter, and you might think about this intuitively, is that you're not going to have a perfect free market model. It's going to be a little bit tilted towards a centrally planned model, although maybe not much. The best example of a free market model is the United States. And where ours is not a 100% pure free model, it's impossible for that to occur. But what you will find is that the most free market model, probably in the world, is the United States. What are some characteristics? What are the three main characteristics, for example, of the free market model? It has limited government involvement. B, it relies on the price system to make sure that the right amount of products are produced and the right amount of products are demanded through the price system. Individuals, and when I say individuals, I'm basically talking about consumers. So consumers and producers express their desires through the price system. It's also an important element of a free market model that you have free enterprise. And that's really nothing more than saying, hey, look, consumers, producers, and anyone that owns resources all have complete freedom of choice. And identifying, okay, what's a resource owner as opposed to a producer? Well, for example, let's say a producer is a business and they have an ice cream store, they produce ice cream and they sell it to consumers. But what if they don't own their building? What if they lease their building from a resource owner? That person owns land, person owns building, that person interjects capital, but they don't actually produce it, and they are not considered consumers in that respect. So that's what a resource owner is. So, but everybody has complete freedom of choice in this model, and that's important because we need to make sure that there's not any outside influences at this stage. But we'll talk about those that do affect it here in just a second. Okay, so in a market economy, again, looking back at our circular flow model, what you'll find is that the factor market. So what happens in a circular flow model is households, also another name for consumers, they actually supply the factors of production, such as land, such as labor, such as capital, and other resources. They provide those to firms who in turn produce things. All right. So if households supply the factors of production to firms, the firms are actually demanding some of those things so that they might produce their goods and services. They need the land because they need a place to have the business. They need the labor. They need to have employees so that they can pay them to produce goods and services. And they need capital, whether it's capital assets like a piece of equipment, whether it's working capital so that they can afford to pay their employees before they actually get paid by the customers. So the households providing the factors of production is considered a factor market. On the other hand, in the exact opposite, a product market is where the firms likewise supply various goods and services according to what the consumers want or their demand. And how do these things cross? How do we meet between the factor and the product markets? How do we meet between the consumers and the producers? It happens using the price mechanism, which is another word for market mechanism, where buyers and sellers plans coincide and there's no excess supply and there's no excess demand. What do we call that? We call it equilibrium. It makes sense that buyers and sellers would find a place where they can meet, where there's no excess supply or excess demand. Again, that's really an impossibility, but in a perfect world, it does exist, and we call it equilibrium. So let's just move on into a couple of other elements in this first module, one of which is the theory of demand. And really all we've done here is I've taken a very simple chart to the left, a graph to the left, where quantity along the x-axis and price along the y-axis is that everywhere on the curve that you see labeled demand is that at any point, the price of that good is being paid for by somebody, and the quantity that is being produced meets the price that's being paid. And so we'll go over that in just a second. But basically what it says is that there's a willingness to pay out there, okay? And the willingness to pay, just so you'll know, anything under that demand curve right there that I've got hatched in red curved lines, that's also called willingness to pay. Okay, that's just vocabulary, so you'll need it in the future. That's called willingness to pay. But the basic law of demand is that as a price rises, that the demand fall, and at prices drop, then demand increases. That's why you have a demand curve. So, for example, if we started at where the x and y axis intersect, and we decrease the price sloping downward, and let's just say under the E for demand, in the word demand, that point right there is, since the price has dropped, the quantity has grown. If you drew a line straight up from the x-axis that was just a straight line up to the E in demand, you would have a point on the demand curve where the quantity equals the price. So, or where the plans of the producer, which is the quantity, and the demands of the consumer meet. Okay. Now, there's a derived demand that occurs too. All you need to know about that is that there is a demand that sometimes when there's consumers out there that demand things, and price is an important piece of it, but sometimes there's some intermediate things that affect that demand, and the difference between what they're actually willing to pay and what their other things that might affect quantities is where you come up with a derived demand. It might be a little lower, it might be a little higher, but it's based on the relationship between the intermediate inputs to the equation here. Read the chapter where Myers talks about that a little bit, but just recognize that derived demand does exist. The other things that sometimes you need to pay attention to when it comes to where demand and supply intersect is that sometimes there are complementary goods, or what we just say complement, are where the goods are used together so that when demand of one rises, demand of the other rises as well. The simple example in Myers is carpet and housing. It makes sense. When you buy a house, like as not, you're going to be buying carpet along with said house. You've got to be in a house, whether you're renting it or owning it, before you're going to put carpet in it. So that would be an example of complementary goods. So the other thing that you probably are going to need to spend a little bit of time is I'm going to try to explain this very simply, but you also there's about 4 YouTubes that I've assigned in this module that are really good explanations of what consumer and producer surplus are. It'll really help solidify this. But in fact, honestly, if you just look at this graph, so we've got a supply and demand here, right? The price is on one axis, the quantity is on the other axis, right? The blue line is the supply curve, so to speak. The demand line is the orange line. So where those intersect, and we talked about this before, where those intersect is called equilibrium, right? It's where demand and price meet. Okay, so in this particular case, at P1 and Q1, which are the white dotted lines that connect to the E, that's your points that if you drew them straight across to the price and straight down to the quantity, it's important that you know what that affects. So in this particular case, we're looking at, let's say, producer surplus. All right. So if you look at the black lines underneath the equilibrium line, understanding that the blue line is actually supply, but we've also established that the equilibrium price for the quantity of one or quantity one, people are willing to buy that many of the product at the P1 price. However, the producer is willing to actually, the producer is willing to produce at the white lines. Okay. So the producer is willing to produce at that particular price. However, you can see that the supply curve goes up, which means that the producer is willing to supply a certain quantity of that product along that axis. So that really means that when people are willing to pay for something, they're actually going to be able to understand that there's always going to be, how can I say this? So the difference between what the producer is willing to sell the good and service for and what they actually receive from the consumer is called the producer surplus. So in other words, the producer is actually willing to sell that product at a lesser price, and that's shown in a graduated fashion on the blue line. But in fact, the consumer is willing to pay more for that. And that's what the white line is. So, in essence, the producer would have been willing to accept a lesser amount of money to produce those goods, but in fact, they got paid more for those goods because of consumer demand. So the difference in those is a surplus for the producer. And as you might imagine, on the flip side, a consumer surplus is the extra benefit that consumers receive above and beyond the price that they pay. So, for example, as the demand curve shows that they are willing to pay what is the white line between P1 to the E and then the E down to the Q1, what is above that and under the supply line is actually consumer surplus. So they've only paid. So in the converse of what we talked about with producer is that they actually only paid along the white line, but they received benefit along the orange line that runs up and to the left. So all of that area underneath that line up and to the left and what they actually paid for, which is P1 to E, all of that red area in there is actually what we call consumer surplus, because those are benefits that they got above and beyond what they paid. For example, let's just say you have a pen that you're using to write with right now. And to you, that pen is actually worth about $5. But guess what? You only paid 3 for it. So guess what? That $2 difference between what you received as a benefit, you bought a $5 pen for $3. The difference between the 3 and the 5 is consumer surplus. It seems like a difficult concept, but it's actually not. It's one or the other, the producer or the consumer got more than they actually paid for, or they got more than they were willing to actually take. Okay, theory of supply. So what we're doing here is, if we look at the supply line and we look at the, again, same sort of graph as we had on the page before, where price is on one side, quantities on the other, and the equilibrium point is where the green line intersects the red and the orange line. Okay, in the supply side, the important thing for you to remember is that the level of response to a change in the supply to a change in the price is called price elasticity. So the more that the supply, the percentage in which the supply changes based on a given change in price, so that if we work our way up and down that supply, as things move up on the y-axis, then how much of a percentage increase happens between where the supply line was and where the supply line goes to as a result of that price change. So in this particular case, let's say S1 resulted in that the price went up. You can see where the supply will intersect at the bottom, and the price went up. Well, guess what? The supply line went up as well. And what the difference between S1 and S is actually, it's a finite number. And that percent change based on the percent change in price is the price elasticity of supply. The converse is also true, that a percent change in demand based on the percent change in price is what the price elasticity is. One thing you need to be aware of, though, is that these are all based on perfect world understandings, but that's not how things work. There will be government interventions. There will be outside influences that cause things to be different than they actually are. If taxes are applied to the equation, typically there will be distortions to actual supply and demand. And normally the distortions are due to, and when I say predominantly, those are due to supply elasticity. So in other words, when the price goes up, I am willing to produce more. Whether or not demand actually meets it could be another question. But normally the tax distortions are as a result of supply elasticity. Okay, last piece, and let's talk about this, is that things that we talked about in the previous slides and in the readings that you'll be doing, in that supply and demand in a perfect world, they meet based on price, the price mechanism or the market mechanism. However, markets do fail. And market failure can be defined as it occurs when unrestricted price systems even though it's a free market, that they cause too few or too many resources to be allocated to a specific economic activity. So in other words, it may be at equilibrium even, but it doesn't mean that the market is actually functioning the way that it should. Sometimes too few and sometimes too many resources um, are allocated to specific economic activities. And you can probably come up with examples of that, but just suffice it to know that that accounts for a market failure. So markets don't always work the way that they should. So, and the reason that they don't work the way that they should is that we talked about buyers and sellers being willing to meet in a market transaction, but sometimes it happens that there are additional costs to either the buyer or seller, or there are additional benefits to the buyer or seller. And so it's not a perfect equilibrium at that point. It's not a perfectly efficient market because there are some costs and benefits that happen outside that particular market transaction. Those are known as externalities. So let me sort of explain how some of those externalities, what's an example of a market failure because of some externalities. So in the text, um, it explains a market failure, for example, is a free rider problem. And all a free rider problem is exactly that. What if you had a bus service that everybody had to pay for, except there were people that would just get on there and they would ride for free, and either no one knew about it or no one was willing to enforce anything. So therefore, if you and I are on that bus and we're paying our fare, but somebody gets on and the bus driver doesn't know that they are on there, that person's actually riding for free. What happens all the time in government services and local economies? It's when a non-paying party can't be excluded from the benefits of a good or service. In the example I just gave, uh, they might be able to exclude if the bus driver was paying attention or whatever, but there are times that you just can't exclude them. For example, what if you decide to provide fire protection in your community? The government pays for that fire protection to be had, but do you think whenever fires start that the fire department goes house to house and they see a little red dot on the mailbox maybe that says, "Oh, well, you are a you pay the fees to have your fires put out," but then they go to the house next door, which is also on fire, and that one doesn't have the little red dot. The firemen are not going to put out the fire where there is a red dot and not put out the fire where there is no dot. So a way to actually keep a free rider problem from occurring is that government policy could address this problem and usually does. So they go ahead and they spend the money to provide a public good. And in this case, fire protection, if you live in this city, regardless of where you live, you aren't explicitly charged for that service. So the fire protection will happen, whether you paid for it or you didn't pay for it, the fire protection is going to happen. So this is a way for the government to help alleviate the market failure of free riders. Now, is that to say that some people may not indirectly pay for that fire protection because maybe they own their home and the fire protection is maybe a component of the funds that go through property taxes to the municipality? Perhaps. So they may ultimately pay for it, but they don't explicitly pay for it. But the fact of the matter is, the government provides it through spending tax dollars, and everybody receives the benefit. So that's a way of intervention. We talked a little bit about leakages and we talked about intervention. So the government actually spends money to intervene to help alleviate the free rider problem. It doesn't always, however, government intervention does not always affect economic efficiency. And when it doesn't, that's known as government failure. All right, so that's all I've actually got on the slides for Module 1. Those are the important things. And when I say the important things, these are going to be things that may be dealt with on the test. These are certainly things that are going to be dealt with in the readings. And I would encourage you to do those readings, watch the YouTube so you can better understand all of this and give you some more information other than just what I gave you. So again, stay in touch. If you need to know anything, if you don't understand anything, please reach out to me and we'll see you in the next module.